Select, or Apple Podcast title. The Deep Dive. The Lens of History. J Malan Heslop. WWII, Combat Photography, and Documenting Truth. Apple Podcast description. Apple Podcast description. Join us for a profound deep dive into the life and lens of J Malan Heslop, a pioneering WWII combat photographer who captured some of the 20th century's most defining moments. From his early days as a Utah farm boy to his vital role in the 167th Signal Photographic Company, we explore how Heslop documented everything from the Battle of the Bulge to Churchill and de Gaulle in Paris. Most crucially, we unpack his harrowing work as one of the first American photographers to capture evidence of Nazi war crimes during the liberation of the Ebensee concentration camp. Discover how this Holocaust photography preserved the truth for the United States National Archives and the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and follow his post-war journey as a longtime editor for the Deseret News and prominent figure in LDS church history. If you've ever wondered about the individuals behind the camera who shape our historical memory, this deep dive is for you.
Imagine standing in the absolute freezing cold of Europe in the winter of 1944.
It's brutal conditions.
Right, totally brutal. You are thousands of miles away from home. Your breath is pluming in the icy air, and the deafening, earth-shaking sound of artillery fires going off all around you.
Yeah.
Your fingers are completely numb. Your heart is pounding in your chest. But your primary job, your singular duty in this unimaginable chaos, isn't to hold a rifle or command a squad. It is to hold a small metal camera.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. You have to keep your hands steady, manually adjust your aperture, look through a tiny glass viewfinder, and document history as it quite literally explodes around you.
Yeah, that level of focus it's hard to even comprehend.
Exactly. I mean, have you ever looked at a famous historical photograph, one of those gritty black and white images that completely defines an era, and considered the physical reality of the person who had to be standing there?
Right. Someone actually had to take the picture.
Yes. The person who had to conquer every human instinct to flee just to freeze that moment in time for the rest of us.
It really changes your relationship with history when you start looking at the photographer rather than just the photograph.
Absolutely.
Because we consume so many images today, thousands of them effortlessly scrolling past our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But we rarely stop to think about the human being on the other side of the lens, especially in a combat zone.
Right.
The act of taking a picture in that environment is, well, it's an act of profound physical courage.
And that tension is really the heartbeat of our deep dive today. We are exploring the life of J Malan Heslop. We're charting the phenomenal trajectory of a man who served as a critical eye for the world during the Second World War.
A really unique perspective.
We are going to explore how his life's work bridged the unimaginable global trauma of the 1940s and then transitioned into a life of deep, localized community faith and leadership.
Yeah, it's quite the shift.
It's a narrative arc that moves from the absolute darkest shadows of the 20th century back into the light of a very quiet, purposeful civilian life.
The geography of his life alone is staggering. I mean, we are tracing a journey that begins on a very humble Weber County, Utah farm.
Right.
Moves through the glamour of Hollywood training backlots, plunges into the grim, historical liberation of the Ebensee concentration camp in Austria, and eventually settles into a decades-long career as an influential newspaper editor and a significant leader within the LDS Church.
It's a massive scope.
The scope is massive, yeah, both geographically and emotionally.
And the reason this individual story carries so much weight for us today, is rooted in our modern relationship with images. We live in an era where we all have incredibly powerful cameras right in our pocket.
Taking hundreds of photos a day.
Without a second thought. We filter them, we manipulate them, we delete them. But Heslop's story strips all of that away. It is a masterclass in the absolute weight, the profound responsibility, and the vital historical necessity of the photographic image.
It really is.
His life demonstrates what it means when taking a photograph isn't just about capturing a personal memory, but about securing irrefutable historical evidence for the world.
You're talking about the camera as an instrument of truth, and in some cases an instrument of justice.
Exactly. So let's look at where that foundational understanding of the world begins. J Malan Heslop was born on June 18, 1923, in a place called Taylor, Utah. He was the oldest of 3 children born to Jesse and Zella Malan Heslop, and when he was 3 years old, his family relocated to a farm in West Weber, Utah.
Now, growing up on a farm in rural Utah during the 1920s and the 1930s, is a highly specific cultural and environmental crucible.
Oh, for sure.
It's an environment that fundamentally shapes how a person interacts with the physical world. Think about what a farm upbringing actually demands of a young person.
A lot of hard work.
Right. It's not just doing chores, though. It is an education in immense patience. You learn that things take time to grow, that seasons have to change, and that you cannot rush the natural order of things.
You are totally at the mercy of elements much larger than yourself.
Constantly. It also instills a hyper-vigilant sense of observation. You have to watch the weather patterns, you have to observe the moisture in the soil, you have to pay attention to the health of the livestock.
It's all connected.
You are intimately connected to the physical world around you in a very grounded, practical way.
Yeah.
When you look at the traits required to be a masterful documentary photographer,
Oh, that's a great connection.
patience, hyper-observation, spatial awareness, and an understanding of light and time, you realize that a 1930s farm is actually a brilliant training ground.
And the specific spark for photography didn't come from a school program initially. It came directly from his family. His father, Jesse, actively encouraged and inspired J Malan's interest in the camera.
That's pretty rare for the time.
Right. Jesse let young Malan use his own camera and allowed him to practice not just taking photos, but developing the prints.
We really need to pause and appreciate the reality of that in the 1930s. Taking and developing prints back then was a deeply manual, highly scientific, and expensive process.
Not like today.
Not at all instantaneous.
Yeah.
You had to understand the physics of light, and you had to understand the chemistry of the dark ring, the developer, the stop bath, the fixer.
Messy stuff.
Very. You had to work blindly in the dark, relying on touch and timing. It required meticulous dedication. So for a father during the Great Depression era, to trust his son with fragile equipment and expensive chemical supplies.
Yeah, that shows a massive investment in his child's curiosity.
Exactly.
It's hands-on learning, quite literally in the dark, and that curiosity clearly blossomed. By the time Heslop reaches Weber High School, he is highly engaged across the board.
Doing a bit of everything.
He really is. He's participating in track and field, he's playing the trombone in the school band, he's a member of the photography club, and he serves as the yearbook photographer.
It paints a picture of a young man learning how to observe people in different settings. He's athletic, he's musical, he's artistic.
Very well-rounded.
He is learning how to exist within and document different micro-communities, which is an essential soft skill for a photojournalist. You have to know how to read a room or a track meet or a band practice to anticipate where the action's going to be.
And then we get to the specific hardware he was using, which is such a telling detail. His very first camera was a 35mm Argus C3. It was equipped with an f3.5 lens and a flash.
The Argus C3 is a legendary piece of equipment in the history of photography. His famous nickname was the Brick. And if you've ever held one, you know exactly why.
I can imagine.
It was heavy, it was completely boxy, it was incredibly durable, and it was unapologetically manual.
It essentially looks like a small cinder block with a lens attached to it.
It really does. To take a picture with the Brick, you couldn't rely on automation. You had to mentally calculate the exposure. You had to adjust that f3.5 lens.
Which was decent for the time, right?
It was reasonably fast for the time and allowed decent light gathering, but it required precise focusing. You had to manually set the shutter speed, and the focusing mechanism itself was a rangefinder.
How did that work?
You looked through a tiny window, saw two overlapping ghost-like images of your subject, and you had to turn a stiff dial until those two images merged into one perfectly sharp image. Only then could you fire the shutter.
Wow. It forces a massive amount of intentionality.
It forces deliberate, sequential thought. Using a heavy, complex, fully manual camera, like the trained Heslop's eye and his muscle memory, long before he ever saw a battlefield. He had to learn to operate those dials instinctively.
And that instinct is put to the ultimate test remarkably early in his life. His first photography job was with the Ogden Standard Examiner.
Right.
While he's working there, an airport fire breaks out. Heslop rushes to the scene, captures photos of this massive fire, and his images make the front page of the Examiner.
Think about the psychological barrier he had to cross in that moment. That local airport fire was essentially his crucible. It was his introductory course in disaster photography.
Definitely.
An event like that requires you to conquer human instinct. When there's a massive fire, every biological imperative screams at you to run away. Photojournalism demands that you run toward the danger to get the shot.
Which is terrifying.
He had to remain perfectly calm, calculate his manual exposure on the Brick, merge those two little rangefinder images, and hold the camera completely steady while chaos, heat, and destruction are unfolding right in front of him.
He proved he could keep his cool while the world was literally burning. And that ability becomes critical because his timeline accelerates incredibly fast right after high school.
It really does.
He graduates from Weber High School on May 17, 1941. He starts at Weber College in the fall of 1941. He then goes on to study photography at Los Angeles City College, and by October 1942, he enlists in the United States Army Reserve.
The historical context surrounding those dates is everything. He starts college in the fall of 1941. On December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor is attacked.
Right. Everything changes.
The United States officially enters the Second World War. The entire environment he is studying in shifts dramatically overnight. He transitions from a young man honing his craft as a local news photographer to living in a nation fully mobilized for total global war.
Answering the call.
Exactly. Answering the military call in October 1942 was a shared reality for his generation.
Yeah.
But his specific skill set, his ability to remain calm behind a lens, was about to be utilized in a highly specialized way.
Which brings us to a wildly fascinating pivot. In November 1942, shortly after enlisting, Heslop is sent to study at Paramount Studios in Hollywood.
Yes.
With the Signal Photographic School, Hollywood studios training combat photographers.
It sounds like a bizarre contradiction. You have Hollywood glamour on one side and the brutal grit of a global war on the other. But from a strategic standpoint, it was brilliant. The military looked at Hollywood studios and saw the undisputed masters of visual storytelling. Paramount Pictures knew everything there was to know about lighting, about framing, about the technical mechanics of cameras, and about how different film stocks reacted to different environments.
They were the premier image makers of the world.
And the United States military recognized that they desperately needed those exact skills to document the war effort.
For propaganda?
Well, the military needed visual documentation for three distinct critical reasons. First, tactical intelligence. They needed to see troop movements, enemy fortifications, and terrain.
Makes sense.
Second, public morale. They needed to show the American public what the soldiers were facing to maintain support for the war and drive war bond sales. And third, they needed it for the historical record.
So Paramount was the best place to learn that.
The Signal Corps realized that a farm boy from Utah who cut his teeth on an Argus C3 had the raw talent, but if they sent him to the Paramount lots, he could learn how to frame a shot from the greatest visual technicians alive.
He is learning the language of cinema to document the reality of war.
Exactly.
After this highly specialized training, he is assigned to the 167th Signal Photographic Company. He receives the rank of Technician 5th grade, or T5, which is the equivalent of a corporal.
Right.
He completes his basic training in Lebanon, Tennessee, which is where he takes his first official Army photographs. And then his deployment is set. On July 23, 1944, he ships out on a vessel called the Mauretania, heading straight into the European theater.
Before we follow him across the Atlantic, we have to look at a deeply personal milestone that happens right before he leaves. J Malan Heslop married Faye Stokes on May 1st, 1944.
In the Salt Lake Temple. The timing of that is so incredibly tight.
He gets married on May 1st, and he boards a troop ship for a war zone on July 23rd. That is a span of less than 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Consider the psychological reality of the WWII as newlywed. He is embarking on a marriage, experiencing this profound personal joy and commitment, only to immediately have to pack his gear and sail toward the unknown.
It's heartbreaking.
The emotional whiplash of holding your new wife and then holding your combat camera on a ship crossing the Atlantic, it adds such a deeply human layer to him. He isn't just a soldier fulfilling a duty. He is a newlywed husband who has everything to lose.
And the environment he sails into is vast, chaotic, and perilous. His deployment spans 9 intensely compressed months, from September 1944 to May 1945.
Right.
The geographic footprint of his service covers a massive swath of a war-torn continent: Austria, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, and Germany.
9 months might not sound like a long time in the context of an 88-year life, but in a combat zone, during the final, desperate, incredibly violent push of the Second World War, 9 months is a lifetime.
Oh, absolutely.
Every single day is saturated with life or death stakes. You are constantly moving, constantly exposed, and constantly hyper-aware.
He is operating as part of Arnold E. Samuelson's Combat Assignment Unit, #123. And the sheer variety of what he was ordered to photograph during those 9 months is staggering.
Very diverse assignment.
He is documenting the Counterintelligence Corps. He is photographing titans of history like Charles de Gaulle and Winston Churchill in a liberated Paris. And then he is documenting the primal, freezing brutality of the Battle of the Bulge.
The contrast between those assignments requires an incredible mental and technical flexibility. As a combat photographer, you have to be a chameleon.
Because the settings are so different.
Think about the Paris assignment. The city has been liberated. You are capturing Churchill and de Gaulle. These are polished, historic figures. You are framing a shot of statesmanship, of triumph, of formal gravity.
You're trying to project strength.
You are looking for the iconic image that will run in papers across the free world to project strength and victory.
You have time to consider the framing, to wait for the right expression.
Exactly. That is exactly the luxury you have in that specific scenario. But then the environment shifts completely. You are thrust into the Battle of the Bulge.
A total nightmare.
You are no longer in a liberated city. You are in the densely wooded Ardennes forest in the dead of winter. It is one of the coldest, most miserable, and bloodiest battles the American forces fought in Europe.
Yeah.
You are freezing in the snow, surrounded by artillery fire, sheer desperation, and mass casualties.
The technical challenges of operating a camera in that specific environment must have been a nightmare.
It borders on the impossible.
Yeah.
How do you keep a mechanical camera functioning in sub-zero temperatures? The lubricants inside the lens and shutter mechanisms can literally freeze solid.
I hadn't even thought of that.
The film itself becomes brittle in the extreme cold and can snap inside the camera if you wind it too quickly. Your fingers lose all dexterity, but you still have to manually adjust tiny aperture rings and shutter speed dials.
With frozen hands.
You still have to manually meter the light, reflecting off the blinding white snow, which can easily trick your exposure calculation.
It's so technical.
He had to rely on every ounce of that foundational training from the Utah winters, from the airport fire, and from Hollywood to compartmentalize the terror and execute the mechanics of photography while people are dying around him.
He had to remain a technician in the middle of absolute chaos. And that profound ability to bear witness, to keep his eyes open and his lens focused, brings us to the most harrowing and historically vital chapter of his service.
Yes.
In May 1945, Heslop's unit moves into Austria. It is there that he photographs the liberation of the Ebensee concentration camp. Ebensee was a subcamp of the notorious Mauthausen-Gusen concentration camp system, used primarily for slave labor in underground tunnel construction.
This is a moment where the history of the world pivots.
Yeah.
And he is standing right there at the focal point, tasked with documenting it.
J Malan Heslop was one of the first American photographers to document evidence of Nazi crimes and the prisoners at Ebensee. He was among the very first to point a lens at the reality of the Holocaust as it was being uncovered by Allied forces.
We really need to dwell on the emotional and psychological toll of that reality. Put yourself in the boots of a 21-year-old from a rural farming community in Utah.
Just a kid, really.
He is suddenly peering through a small glass lens at the absolute worst horrors that humanity is capable of inflicting upon itself. He is seeing things that the human mind is fundamentally not built to comprehend.
The starving prisoners, the unburied dead.
The mechanized, bureaucratic infrastructure of genocide. And he is seeing it through a viewfinder, which creates a strange psychological dynamic.
What do you mean?
It simultaneously distances you from the scene, but also forces you to focus intensely on the gruesome details.
His job wasn't just to be horrified. He couldn't turn away. He had a highly specific, mandated purpose.
We have to understand the strategic purpose of this photography. When Heslop was standing in Ebensee, he wasn't capturing newsreels for morale. He was capturing evidence. The combat photographers assigned to these liberated camps were given the agonizing task of securing the visual proof of Nazi war crimes. Military commanders, specifically leaders like General Eisenhower, knew immediately that if these atrocities weren't meticulously documented on film by official sources, future generations might simply refuse to believe they happened.
He saw that coming.
The sheer scale of the evil defied logic. They anticipated Holocaust denialism before the war was even officially over.
They needed undeniable, irrefutable proof.
So Heslop's camera ceases to be just a recording device. It becomes an instrument of justice. But think about the devastating duality of that role for the photographer.
Yeah.
To do his job, to secure that essential evidence, he had to forcefully detach himself emotionally in the moment. He had to look at a scene of unimaginable human suffering, and his brain had to process it technically.
Back to the mechanics.
He had to think, the light in this barracks is low. I need to open the aperture. I need to hold the camera perfectly steady for a slow shutter speed. I need to frame this specific scene so the sheer scale of the atrocity is visible.
He's chilling.
He had to force himself to be a cold, calculating technician while standing in the epicenter of human trauma. The strength required to not drop the camera, to not just collapse under the weight of it, but to keep shooting so the world would know the truth. It is a monumental burden for anyone, let alone someone barely out of his teens.
He had to be the eyes of the world when the world would have rather looked away. He carried that visual evidence back with him. After witnessing the depths of human depravity, after surviving the Battle of the Bulge and the liberation of Ebensee, the war ends.
Finally.
Heslop returns home to Utah. And his next move is a pivot that I found incredibly revealing about how human beings process trauma. After returning from Europe, he enrolls at Utah State Agricultural College,
Which we now know as Utah State University up in Logan.
Right. He graduates in June of 1948. And his degree isn't in photojournalism. It's not in history or political science. He gets a degree in agriculture.
It seems like a left turn, but when you consider the psychological aftermath of what he had just survived, it makes a profound amount of sense.
Why agriculture after being at the center of global news?
Consider where he had just been and the nature of what he had witnessed. He had spent 9 months documenting the literal destruction of the physical world and the human body.
The ultimate destruction.
He photographed bombed-out cities, cratered landscapes, frozen forests filled with casualties, and the systematic, mechanized destruction of human life in the concentration camps. He witnessed the world being torn apart.
Yeah.
Coming back home to his roots, remember, he grew up on a farm in West Weber, and choosing to study agriculture is a massive psychological reset.
It's a return to the soil.
Exactly. What is the fundamental nature of agriculture? It is the study of how to grow things. It is about nurturing life from the earth. It is about cultivation, sustainability, and the quiet, predictable turning of the seasons. After being surrounded by death, chaos, and the darkest capabilities of mankind, putting his hands in the dirt and focusing on the cycles of life and growth must have been a deeply necessary healing mechanism.
That makes perfect sense.
It was a return to the foundational, life-affirming principles of his childhood before the war shattered everything.
But he doesn't abandon his calling. After earning that degree in agriculture and grounding himself, he returns to the camera. He joins the Deseret News newspaper in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Right.
His talent and experience were obviously undeniable, because shortly after joining the staff, he is promoted to chief photographer, and he holds that position for 20 years.
This introduces another fascinating contrast in his life's work. For 2 decades, he serves as the chief photographer for a major daily newspaper in Utah. He is capturing civilian life.
A huge shift from combat.
He's photographing religious gatherings, community events, local politics, high school sports, state fairs. He is applying the exact same high-stakes technical skills, the situational awareness, the framing, the ability to read lighting that he honed at Paramount Studios and in the Ardennes Forest, but he is applying them to everyday, peaceful community journalism.
The camera that documented the Holocaust is now documenting a ribbon-cutting ceremony.
It is a beautiful full-circle moment. He is using his talents to reflect the daily rhythms of a peaceful society back to itself.
And his career trajectory didn't stop behind the lens. He eventually moves to the editor's desk. From 1968 to 1976, he serves as the editor of the Church News, a publication distributed both as an insert in the Deseret News and via mail to a broader global readership.
A very influential role.
Following that, in 1976, Heslop becomes the managing editor of the Deseret News itself. He holds that critical managing editor position from 1976 to 1981, and then serves another stint from 1983 until 1988.
This transition from the darkroom to editorial leadership represents a major evolution in how he interacts with the public. For decades, he communicated almost exclusively through images.
Wow.
He let the photographs convey the narrative. But as a managing editor, he is now guiding the written word. He is directing the editorial vision of a major institution.
He's setting the agenda.
He is deciding which stories matter, how they should be covered, and what the ultimate narrative is for a massive readership base. It shows a man who has grown from a frontline silent observer into a seasoned, trusted community voice who actively shapes public discourse.
That concept of being a trusted voice in the community extends far beyond the newsroom. J Malan Heslop had incredibly deep roots and held extensive leadership roles within the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Very extensive.
For listeners who might not be familiar with the structure of the LDS Church, the sheer volume of his service is remarkable. He served as a bishop of the Salt Lake 26th Ward. A bishop is essentially the unpaid pastoral leader of a local congregation, requiring massive amounts of time counseling members and organizing local efforts.
It is a heavy, emotionally demanding role.
He was also a counselor in the stake presidency of the Salt Lake Pioneer Stake, and later the president of the Salt Lake Stake. A stake oversees multiple local congregations, so as stake president, he was managing the spiritual and administrative affairs for thousands of people.
That's a lot of responsibility.
He was a member of the YMMIA General Board, which directed the youth programs for the young men of the church globally. He served as a regional representative, advising local leaders across broader geographic areas.
It just kept going.
He was the president of the Chicago North Mission, relocating his family to oversee hundreds of young missionaries. And he served as a stake patriarch, a role given to spiritually mature men to provide individualized, deeply personal blessings to church members.
When you look at that list of callings, it paints a portrait of a man entirely devoted to the service of others. Think about how his worldview must have been shaped by his 20s.
Seriously.
A man who looked through a lens at the absolute darkest shadows humanity can produce in 1945 Europe, returns home, and dedicates the vast majority of his adult life to spiritual leadership. He spent his time counseling, guiding, and providing moral framework to his community.
It's an amazing response to trauma.
He witnessed the abyss, and his response wasn't nihilism or despair. His response was to spend the rest of his life tirelessly building up his community, nurturing faith, and serving his fellow man. It is a powerful testament to his resilience.
And at the absolute center of all of that service was his family. He and Faye Stokes, the woman he married just weeks before shipping off to war, went on to have 5 children together: Paul, Lynn, Scott, Anne, and Dawn.
Big family.
They even co-authored an autobiography together, wonderfully titled Doubletree Adventure.
Which is a beautiful detail because it ensures that his personal history, his family's intimate story, is documented and preserved just as meticulously as the grand sweeping world history he captured with his Argus C3.
That passion for documentation clearly never left him because he also had a prolific career as an author and historian. He authored or co-authored several publications, often collaborating with Del Van Orden.
Right.
In 1973, he published a book called From the Shadow of Death, Stories of POWs. In 1971, he wrote Joseph Fielding Smith, a prophet among the people, documenting the life of a prominent church leader. And in 1978, he published a highly practical book titled How to Compile Your Family History.
If you look closely at those titles, there is a very clear thematic through line. From the Shadow of Death. Stories of POWs directly connects back to his war experience. He saw the camps, he saw the prisoners, he understood the trauma of captivity.
He carried that with him.
This book demonstrates a lingering empathy and a deep desire to give voice to those who suffered in the shadows.
He didn't want their experiences to be forgotten.
Not at all. And then you look at How to Compile Your Family History. This connects directly to his absolute obsession with preservation.
Because he knew the value of records.
Whether he is preserving the macro history of the world through a combat camera, or preserving the microhistory of a single family through genealogy and records, his driving impulse is identical. Do not let the past disappear. Document it. Keep the evidence. Understand where you came from.
He was also heavily involved in the formation of the group that eventually became the Mormon Historic Sites Foundation, dedicating time to physically preserving locations of historical significance to his faith. It all ties back to keeping memory alive. Which brings us to the legacy of his own memories, the archives of his work. The photos he took in 1944 and 1945 aren't just sitting in a box somewhere gathering dust. They are actively preserving history today.
The institutional preservation of his work is monumental.
Brigham Young University, through its Saints at War project, headed by Robert C. Freeman, recognized the immense historical value of his collection. They have digitized and made available online more than 1,000 of Heslop's war photos from World War II.
Over 1,000 images.
Over 1,000 images, completely accessible to the public, preserving exactly what he saw through that viewfinder.
And the institutional weight of where his primary collections are held is the ultimate validation of his life's work. His World War II-era photos are held in the permanent collections of the United States National Archives and the National Holocaust Museum.
These are the highest, most rigorous repositories of historical truth in the nation.
They are. When the National Holocaust Museum needs to show the world the undeniable reality of what happened at Ebensee, when they need to counter modern denialism with hard, visual, irrefutable proof, they rely on the light that passed through J Malan Heslop's lens. His photographs are the foundational evidence of our shared human history.
J Malan Heslop passed away on July 29, 2011, in Salt Lake City, Utah, at the age of 88.
88 years. A long, incredibly full life. And if there's one thing his life demonstrates, it is the profound power of evidence.
Absolutely.
Heslop's journey shows us that the act of looking, the physical act of refusing to turn your eyes away from horror, of documenting and archiving the truth, is an act of profound courage. It is a civic duty of the highest order.
It really is.
His legacy isn't just a collection of old black and white photographs. His legacy is permanently woven into how the entire world remembers World War II and the Holocaust. He made sure we could never say we didn't know.
It is an absolutely incredible scope for one human life. From learning the messy chemistry of developing prints with his dad on a West Weber farm, to conquering his fear at an Ogden airport fire, to training on Hollywood backlots with cinematic masters.
Quite the journey.
From standing in the freezing bloody snow of the Battle of the Bulge, to looking through a viewfinder at the unimaginable horrors of an Austrian concentration camp. And then, taking all of that immense psychological weight back home to Utah, choosing to build a life as an agriculturalist, a community journalist, an editor, a father, and a deeply committed spiritual leader. He saw the very worst of the world and spent the rest of his life contributing to the very best of it.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. J Malan Heslop spent his youth looking through a small piece of glass to capture the absolute darkest shadows of the 20th century. But he spent the rest of his life developing the light through his family, his faith, and his community. So the next time you pull out your phone to take a quick photo to remember a moment, ask yourself, what are you actively choosing to preserve for the future? And what will that evidence say about the world you lived in?
That is certainly something to think about the next time you tap that shutter button. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary life of J Malan Heslop. It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just a collection of dates and facts. It is the view through the lens of individuals who were brave enough to keep their eyes open. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.